I used to think that love could fix everything. I wasn't naive, not in the way we see in rom-coms or fairy tales, but I believed that if I was patient enough, kind enough, and clear enough, eventually, he'd meet me there. There was a quiet certainty in me, the kind that whispered, if I just keep showing up, keep trying harder, keep loving him in ways he might not yet understand, then eventually, he'll understand. I didn't think he was intentionally distant. I thought he just didn't know better. I thought that maybe if I gave him space, let him come to me on his own time, he'd finally meet me halfway. After all, love was supposed to be enough, right? But the thing about love is that it requires more than one person to make it work. It's like trying to build a bridge across a deep chasm by yourself. No matter how many planks you lay down, no matter how much effort you put in, if the other person isn't willing to meet you halfway, that bridge will never be complete. At first, it was small things. I told myself, he's just stressed, he's going through a lot. I told myself, maybe he's just been hurt before and doesn't know how to open up. I stayed patient. I kept trying to be the person who understood, who didn't need too much, who wasn't demanding, who just quietly loved. But the more I loved, the less I received in return. There were times when I'd speak up, express what I needed, what I was missing. I wasn't asking for grand gestures. I didn't want flowers or romantic dates. I wanted simple things. I wanted him to listen when I spoke, to hold my hand when I was upset, to look at me like he saw me, like I wasn't just another responsibility. But every time I expressed myself, it was like I was speaking a different language. His response was always a confused look, or worse, silence. Sometimes he'd say sorry, but it never felt real. Sometimes he'd cry, and I'd feel like I'd gotten through to him. But those apologies, they were like smoke. They filled the air but never left anything substantial behind. No fire, no warmth, nothing to hold on to. And still, I stayed. Because I believed in love, I believed in the power of patience and understanding. I believed that if I just kept loving him hard enough, eventually, he'd meet me there. It was almost like a quiet hope that this unspoken effort would be enough. But what I didn't realize was that love can't be one-sided, and eventually, that hope started to wither. I gave everything I had, all of myself, all of my energy, my patience, my understanding. I tried to fix things, to fix him, to fix us. But no matter how much I tried, I was always the one putting in more. I was the only one showing up, the only one trying to meet the other person's needs. It was exhausting. I was stretching myself thin, convinced that if I just loved him enough, things would change. But what I've learned, the hard way, is this: love isn't about fixing someone else. Love isn't about constantly sacrificing yourself, hoping the other person will finally understand what you need. Love is about two people, equally invested, each bringing their whole selves to the table, not just one person carrying the weight of it all. In the end, I realized I couldn't be both the mirror and the medicine. I couldn't keep showing up and giving everything while he stayed emotionally absent. And as much as it hurt, it became clear that love doesn't work when it's just one person doing all the work. There's a kind of silence that's heavier than any words could ever be. It's the kind of silence that doesn't just fall between the pauses of conversation, but stretches across entire seasons of a relationship. It's not the quiet after an argument, where you both need space to cool down. No, this silence is something deeper, something more insidious. It's the silence of emotional absence, the quiet that quietly erodes the connection between two people, until it feels like there's nothing left to say. At first, I didn't recognize it. It didn't hit me all at once. It crept in, piece by piece. Little moments where I tried to share something, anything, with him, and he just wasn't there. Not physically, not emotionally. He'd be in the same room, but it was like I was speaking to a wall. I'd tell him about my day, and he'd nod, barely looking up from his phone. I'd try to make a joke, to make him laugh, and his response would be a simple huh, or a half-hearted smile, before he'd retreat back into his thoughts. I kept telling myself that this was just a phase, that he was just distracted. Maybe he was stressed, maybe he was tired. I kept excusing the distance, rationalizing it away, hoping that one day he would see me, really see me, and things would go back to the way they were. But the truth was, the more I waited for him to meet me, the further apart we drifted. The silence wasn't just physical, it was emotional. When I tried to talk about my needs, about how I felt, he would look at me like I was speaking a language he'd never bothered to learn. It wasn't that he was dismissive, at least not overtly. He wasn't cruel, but he was emotionally absent in a way that made me feel invisible. His eyes would glaze over, or he'd look away, or sometimes he'd even say sorry, but it was empty. It was a word that was supposed to fill the space between us, but it only highlighted the chasm that had already formed. I started to realize something I hadn't wanted to admit. This wasn't just a phase. This wasn't something that could be fixed by more patience, more kindness, more understanding. This was something deeper, something that couldn't be mended with just love. The silence became my constant companion. I found myself talking to him, trying to pull him back into the conversation, into us. But my words started to feel like echoes, bouncing off a wall, fading into the emptiness between us. It wasn't just that he wasn't listening, it was that he couldn't listen. His heart wasn't in it. His presence wasn't in it. I began to wonder if he even noticed how much I was giving, how much I was reaching for him, how much I was trying to make the relationship work, while he just stood there. I'd ask him questions about his day, about his thoughts, about his dreams, but they seemed to go unanswered. And when I'd ask how he was feeling, the answer was always the same: I'm fine. Those two words were like a shield, blocking me out, leaving me with nothing to hold on to. I started to question everything. Was I doing something wrong? Was I asking for too much? Was I not enough? But the more I asked, the more I realized that the problem wasn't me. The problem was that I had been trying to reach someone who was already gone, emotionally, if not physically. And as much as I loved him, as much as I wanted to fix things, I couldn't keep giving and giving without ever receiving anything in return. And that's when I started to feel the weight of it all. The silence wasn't just the absence of words, it was the absence of connection. It was the slow realization that no matter how much I loved him, I couldn't love him into loving me back. The apologies started to feel like empty promises, words that drifted into the air, but never landed. They didn't feel real anymore. They didn't feel like they were coming from a place of understanding or change. They were just words that didn't heal, words that didn't fix the distance between us. At first, I believed them. When he would apologize, I would soften, I would let him in, I would listen, and I would believe that maybe, just maybe, he was finally going to change. Maybe this time, things would be different. Maybe this time, he would hear me, truly hear me. Maybe this time, his words would match his actions. But time and again, they didn't. There was a pattern I couldn't ignore. He would apologize. He'd say he was sorry for not being there for me, for not listening, for not being the partner I needed. Sometimes, I'd see the guilt in his eyes, the vulnerability that flickered there before he closed it off again. Sometimes, he would cry, real genuine tears, and I would soften even more. He'd beg for my forgiveness, promise things would get better, tell me how much he loved me, and I would believe him. For a while, I clung to those moments like life buoys, convinced that love was enough to fix what was broken. I would forgive him, and we would try again. I would think, this is it, this is the turning point. He's finally hearing me. He's finally going to be the partner I need. But each time, the apologies became less and less meaningful. They started to sound rehearsed, almost robotic. They were his way of checking a box, of relieving his own guilt, but they didn't carry the weight of change. They didn't come with actions. They didn't come with a commitment to actually show up for me in the ways I needed him to. The tears, the apologies, they were just a temporary balm to quiet my pain, but they didn't address the core of the problem. The core was that he wasn't emotionally available, not in the way I needed him to be. He didn't know how to meet me halfway. He didn't know how to meet his own emotions, let alone mine. And I started to see it. The apologies weren't for me. They weren't an acknowledgement of what was wrong, or a promise to change. They were his way of keeping things comfortable for him, of maintaining the status quo. The apologies weren't about making amends. They were about avoiding conflict, and avoiding real change. They were his shield, a way to buy himself more time in the relationship, without actually investing in it. I wasn't angry at him, not really. I was angry at myself for accepting it for so long, for believing that love could be enough to fix something that wasn't broken in me. but broken in him. For thinking that by loving him more, I could somehow teach him how to love me the way I needed. It wasn't until I stopped accepting the apologies as enough that I saw the truth. Love without reciprocity isn't love. It's a one-sided contract where only one person is giving, and the other is just taking. I had been showing up with open hands, offering him everything I had, but he was showing up with closed fists, holding on to his own wounds, not ready to share them, not ready to heal. He didn't want healing, he wanted shelter, shelter from vulnerability, shelter from accountability, shelter from the discomfort that comes with real change. And that's when it hit me. The apologies weren't an invitation for us to grow together. They were a way for him to keep me exactly where he wanted me, waiting for something that was never going to come. There's a kind of exhaustion that comes from being the only one who cares. It's not the exhaustion of physical labor, or the busyness of everyday life. No, this kind of exhaustion is emotional, and it sinks into your bones in a way that nothing else can. It's the tiredness that comes from constantly trying to make something work, when you're the only one putting in the effort. It's the weight of giving everything, your love, your patience, your time, your understanding, and never receiving any of it in return. At first, I didn't realize how much I was giving. It felt natural, like it was just part of loving him. I gave and gave, because I thought that's what love was supposed to be. Love meant showing up for someone, even when they weren't showing up for you. Love meant being patient, understanding, giving them space to change, even when they weren't ready to meet you where you needed them to. But the truth is, I was burning myself out. I was so focused on meeting his needs, on proving that I loved him enough, that I forgot to check in with myself. I forgot to ask if I was being cared for. I forgot to wonder if I was giving too much of myself, and leaving nothing behind for me. I started to feel invisible. He was there physically, yes, but emotionally, he was a ghost. I'd try to talk to him, try to share my thoughts, my feelings, my needs, and it was like he couldn't hear me, or maybe he didn't want to hear me. Either way, it felt like I was speaking to someone who wasn't really listening, and it hurt. Every time I showed up, every time I put in the effort, it felt like I was doing it alone, like I was carrying the weight of the relationship on my shoulders, while he simply existed beside me. He wasn't contributing to the emotional labor. He wasn't offering any reassurance. He wasn't even offering me the bare minimum, the respect of really seeing me. The hardest part wasn't just the silence. It wasn't just the lack of emotional connection. It was that I kept waiting for him to notice. I kept hoping that one day, he'd look at me and realize how much I was giving, how much I was sacrificing, and that he would step up. I thought if I loved him enough, he would eventually see me too. I thought that if I kept giving, if I kept trying, he would come around. But the more I gave, the more he took, and the more he took, the more I lost. It wasn't just the emotional distance that wore me down, it was the feeling that I was invisible, that my needs didn't matter. I started to question myself. Was I asking for too much? Was I being too needy? Was it me? But deep down, I knew the truth. It wasn't me. It wasn't that I was too much. It was that I was the only one trying to make it work. I was the only one invested in the relationship. I was the one holding everything together, pretending everything was fine, convincing myself that love could fill the cracks. But the cracks were deep, and love alone wasn't enough to mend them. Not when one person wasn't ready to meet you halfway. Not when one person wasn't willing to do the work, to face their own emotional walls, and to truly show up. I kept telling myself that it would get better, that things would change. But nothing changed, nothing shifted. The silence grew louder, and I grew more exhausted. And that's when I knew I couldn't keep carrying the weight of a relationship that wasn't being shared. I couldn't keep giving when there was nothing left to give. The turning point came quietly, almost imperceptibly. I wish I could tell you it was some grand epiphany, a dramatic moment where everything clicked into place, but it wasn't. It was a slow realization that built up over time, a quiet awareness that grew in the spaces between our conversations, between my efforts, and in the hollow moments of silence. It happened one night when I was sitting in our living room, staring out the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. I had spent the entire evening trying to get him to talk to me, trying to share how I felt, trying to ask for something, anything, that showed he was still there with me, emotionally. But he was distant, as usual. His eyes were fixed on the television, his mind miles away, and I felt that old ache begin to spread through me again. I watched him for a long time, wondering why I was still trying, and then suddenly, something inside me shifted. It wasn't anger, or frustration, or bitterness, it was clarity. It was like I had finally stepped outside of myself and saw the situation for what it truly was. I saw that I had been giving and giving, hoping that he would meet me there, but I had forgotten one very important thing. I deserved to be met halfway. I deserved more than empty apologies. I deserved more than a relationship where I was the only one fighting for it. I deserved more than the silence. That moment wasn't about rage or revenge. It wasn't about wanting him to change. It was about realizing that I couldn't keep ignoring my own needs. I couldn't keep pretending that I was okay when I was barely holding on, and most importantly, I realized that I was the one who needed to change. Not him, not the relationship, but me. I had been so focused on loving him enough to make up for what he wasn't able to give me, that I had forgotten to love myself. I had put all of my energy into someone else's happiness, someone else's growth, while I slowly drained myself dry. I had spent so long trying to fix something that wasn't broken in me, but broken in him. And the hardest truth I had to face was this: love can't be one-sided. It can't be just about one person constantly giving without ever receiving. I had spent months trying to convince myself that if I loved him enough, he would finally love me the way I needed. But love isn't about proving your worth to someone else, it's about knowing your own worth, and not settling for anything less. I had been willing to settle for a relationship that drained me, because I thought that was what love was supposed to be. But love, real love, isn't about sacrificing yourself for the sake of someone else's emotional comfort. Love should be a partnership, a shared investment in each other's growth, not a one-sided effort to fix what's broken. That night, sitting in the quiet of our living room, I made a decision. I wasn't going to abandon myself anymore. I wasn't going to keep trying to love someone who couldn't meet me halfway. I realized that I deserved someone who would show up for me, just as I was willing to show up for them, and I deserved to feel valued, respected, and loved in return. It wasn't about him being a bad person. It wasn't about blaming him for everything that went wrong. It was about recognizing that I had been the one holding on to a relationship that wasn't serving me anymore. And in that moment, I knew that I had to let go, not because I stopped loving him, but because I finally started loving me. It's a painful truth to learn. Love is not always enough. I used to believe that if you loved someone deeply enough, it would fix the problems in the relationship. That love could heal the wounds, bridge the gaps, make up for the emotional distance. I thought if I just loved him enough, I could teach him how to love me back the way I needed. But love, as I learned the hard way, can't fill every void. It can't solve every problem, and it can't force someone to meet you halfway, if they aren't ready to. For so long, I thought that if I loved him with everything I had, eventually he'd see me. I thought that maybe he just needed time, that he just needed to learn how to open up. I thought that my love could be the answer to his emotional walls. But the more I tried, the more I gave, the more I realized that no matter how much I loved him, I couldn't love him into being the person I needed him to be. I had poured so much of myself into him, into the relationship, into trying to make things work, that I lost sight of my own needs. I had been so focused on him, on loving him well, that I had forgotten to love myself. I had forgotten to ask for the things I needed, the things I deserved. I had kept giving, hoping that he would eventually meet me there. But love without reciprocity isn't love, it's self-abandonment. The truth is, love can't fix everything. It can't fill a space that isn't willing to be filled. It can't heal wounds that the other person isn't ready to acknowledge or work on. And it can't bridge the gap when only one person is trying. I realized that my love wasn't enough to fill the silence between us, to heal the emotional distance, or to make him open up. It was hard to accept that the love I had been giving wasn't enough to make him love me the way I needed. And it was even harder to accept that I had been trying to fill that void for so long, convincing myself that one day, somehow, things would change. I had spent so much time waiting for him to come around, waiting for him to see me, to recognize how much I was giving, to finally meet me halfway. But in doing so, I had stopped seeing myself. I had stopped asking myself if I was happy, if I was fulfilled, if I was getting what I needed. I had abandoned myself in the name of love. It was only when I started to take a step back that I saw the truth. Love is not enough if it's not shared. Love can't be one-sided. It can't be built on the hope that one person's love will be enough to change the other. I had been giving everything I had, thinking it would somehow make up for the love and attention I wasn't receiving. But what I realized is that love is a partnership. It's a two-way street. It's about both people showing up, both people giving and receiving, both people meeting each other halfway. And when that isn't happening, when it's only one person trying, one person loving, one person sacrificing, it's not love anymore. It's self-sacrifice. It's emotional exhaustion, and it's not sustainable. That's when I knew I had to let go. Not because I didn't love him, but because I loved myself enough to stop losing myself in a relationship that wasn't serving either of us. I had been giving everything, and it wasn't enough. And in the end, I realized that sometimes, love is not enough. Not if it's only coming from one side. The moment of clarity didn't come all at once. It wasn't some dramatic, earth-shattering realization. It was quieter than that, more subtle. It was a quiet shift in perspective, a gentle unfolding of something I had ignored for too long. It happened on a day just like any other, when I found myself standing in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at my reflection. I had spent so long trying to love him the way he needed, trying to show up for him, trying to fix the unfixable, that I forgot one important thing. I wasn't showing up for me. I wasn't putting myself first. I wasn't loving myself the way I deserved to be loved. As I looked at myself in that mirror, I didn't see the woman who had been giving everything she had. I didn't see the woman who had been bending over backwards, sacrificing her own happiness for someone else. I didn't see the woman who had been holding the weight of the world on her shoulders, hoping that one day, he would recognize her worth. I saw a woman who had lost herself in the process, a woman who had forgotten her own needs, a woman who had abandoned herself in the name of love. And that's when it hit me. I couldn't keep loving someone else, when I wasn't loving myself first. I couldn't keep pouring from an empty cup, hoping that he would fill me up in return. I couldn't keep giving everything to someone who wasn't willing to give anything back. I had spent so long waiting for him to meet me halfway, but the truth was, I needed to start meeting myself halfway. I needed to show up for me, not just for him. Loving myself first didn't mean being selfish or abandoning the people I loved. It didn't mean shutting myself off from others. It meant acknowledging my own worth. It meant understanding that I deserved to be loved, to be seen, to be valued, not just by others, but by myself. I had spent so much time convincing myself that if I loved him enough, everything would be okay. But what I realized in that moment was that I couldn't keep waiting for someone else to validate my worth. I had to do it for myself. The shift wasn't instant. It didn't happen overnight, but it started with that moment in the mirror, where I finally looked at myself and asked, "What do you need? What do you deserve?" And for the first time, I started to listen. I started to hear the quiet voice inside me that had been drowned out by his emotional absence, by my own self-doubt, by my desire to please him. I deserved more. I deserved love, not just from him, but from myself. I deserved to be treated with the same care and respect that I was giving him. I deserved to feel seen, heard, and valued. And most of all, I deserved to stop giving pieces of myself away to someone who wasn't willing to give anything in return. Loving myself first wasn't easy. It meant making difficult decisions. It meant choosing myself, even when it hurt. It meant walking away from a relationship that wasn't serving me, even when I still loved him. But it also meant reclaiming my life. It meant finding my own strength again. It meant finding my own worth, independent of someone else's validation. That was the beginning of my healing, the moment I realized that loving myself first wasn't just an option, it was a necessity. And as I walked that path, slowly but surely, I began to rebuild my life. I began to rebuild myself. The hardest part wasn't realizing I deserved more. The hardest part wasn't even the constant battle to stop giving when I knew I was giving too much. No, the hardest part was the decision itself. Should I stay or leave? It's a question that echoes through the heart like an unending refrain. It's the question you ask yourself when you're faced with the unbearable weight of unrequited love, but you still feel love for the person who's slowly slipping away. It's the question you ask when you're torn between your loyalty to someone you care about and your need for self-preservation. It's the question that keeps you up at night, pacing in the dark, wondering what the right answer really is. I kept telling myself I had to stay. That love meant perseverance,
That love meant fighting for them, even when they couldn't fight for themselves. That love meant waiting until they were ready, until they saw me, until they were capable of giving back what I had given. But the more I stayed, the more I realized I wasn't fighting for the right thing. I wasn't fighting for love. I wasn't fighting for us. I was fighting for a relationship that had already begun to crumble, and I had been too blind to see it. I was fighting for something that wasn't healthy, that wasn't giving me what I needed, and yet I was still holding on, clinging to the hope that things would change, that somehow, love alone would be enough to fix everything. The internal conflict was suffocating. The longer I stayed, the more I lost myself. Every time I let him pull away, every time I ignored my own needs, every time I told myself, it's okay, he's just going through something, he'll come around, I felt a piece of me slip away. I felt my self-worth erode. I was doing everything for him, but I wasn't doing anything for me, and yet I wasn't ready to leave. I loved him. I couldn't just walk away, could I? What about the memories we had, the good times, the moments where things felt right? What about the future we had talked about, the dreams we had shared? What about all the promises? But the truth was, those memories and promises weren't enough to fill the gaps between us anymore. Love wasn't enough if it wasn't reciprocated, and I had been waiting for him to change, waiting for him to meet me halfway. But in the process, I had lost sight of my own needs. I had lost sight of myself. The realization hit me hard. Staying wasn't about love anymore. It was about fear. It was about the fear of being alone, of facing the unknown, of letting go of a relationship that had once felt so promising. It was the fear of change, of what would happen if I chose myself over him. But staying out of fear wasn't a choice that would lead to growth. It wasn't a choice that would lead to healing. I realized that by staying, I wasn't protecting him, and I certainly wasn't protecting myself. I was just postponing the inevitable, prolonging the pain, and that's when the decision became clear. Leaving didn't mean I stopped loving him. Leaving didn't mean I was giving up. Leaving meant I was choosing me. It meant I was choosing to love myself first, to stop sacrificing my happiness for someone who couldn't meet me halfway. It meant I was finally saying, I deserve more than this. Leaving was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but it was also the most necessary. It was the only way I could begin to rebuild myself, to heal, and to finally start living the life I deserved.